Amid the thin veil of mist over Glenford, Officer Adrian Cole stopped in his tracks at a sight he could never forget. A German shepherd standing still before the doors of St. Helena's Church, amber eyes etched with a silent warning. Day after day, through wind and rain, it remained there. Silent, unwavering, as if guarding something of great importance. The town's peace suddenly felt fragile when Adrian decided to follow that gaze, and uncovered a truth that could change everything. What was hidden behind those doors November mornings in Glenford always carried a beauty that was both gentle and full of quiet vitality, as if the entire town had been wrapped in a pale gray wool sweater knitted by patient, skillful hands. The early mist clung to every rooftop, draping a thin veil over the white picket fences, softening their edges with a muted glow. Along the cobblestone path that led to the central square, the street lamps still cast their warm golden light, flickering faintly through the curling breath of cold air. Above the sky wore a pale blue hue, scattered with a few slow-drifting cotton clouds, promising a day that would be cold, yet strikingly clear. The sound of tires whispering against the road echoed steadily as Adrian Cole's patrol car rolled down the familiar streets. He had always loved the unhurried rhythm of Glenford, a small town cradled between pine-covered hills and wide-open fields. It was nothing like the noise and rush of the city where he once worked. Yet it offered something far more valuable, a closeness, a sense of sincerity, and the comfort of being near his aging mother, who had devoted her life to raising him. Adrian, now in his 30s, had a square, steady face framed by neatly cut dark hair. He had once been a detective in the Cedarport Police Department, a place defined by its relentless pace and back-to-back cases. That career had brought him opportunities, but it had also stolen too many nights of sleep. His decision to transfer to Glenford was both to care for his mother and to reclaim the steady rhythm of life he'd always longed for. Among colleagues, Adrian was known for his calm, meticulous nature and an eye that never missed the smallest detail, qualities that made him a valuable officer. That morning, his shift began as usual. He lowered his window slightly, letting the crisp air sweep in, carrying with it the earthy scent of wet wood and fallen pine needles. Through the glass, he saw townsfolk beginning their day. Mrs. Ruth's bakery sent warm clouds of steam into the air. Mr. Finley's general store door was propped open, revealing shelves neatly stocked. A few children's scarves, wound snugly around their necks, dashed across the square with swinging satchels, chasing the school bell. The patrol car turned toward the eastern side of town, where the old stone structure of St. Helena's Chapel stood. Its steep roof and stained glass windows, depicting saints and pastoral scenes, gave it a quiet dignity. In winter, the chapel seemed to sink into the mist, becoming part of the stillness around it. Adrian had driven past it countless times on morning rounds, but today something unusual caught his eye. Before the chapel's heavy wooden doors, a figure stood motionless. Through the haze, it stood out, straight-backed, purposeful. As the car drew closer, Adrian saw it clearly, a German shepherd, its warm amber and black coat gleaming softly in the muted morning light. Ears pricked forward, body poised, it seemed to be waiting, or guarding. He eased his foot off the gas, his eyes fixed on the stillness, or perhaps the deliberate lack of movement, in the dog's stance. The cold wind rustled the nearby pines, but the dog's gaze never wavered from the chapel doors. In the quiet street, the sight was striking, as though the animal and the doorway were bound by a secret only they shared. Pulling to the curb, Adrian wondered if the dog belonged to someone in town. Faces here were rarely unfamiliar, or if it had wandered seeking shelter. Yet his instincts, sharpened by years of investigations, told him this was not a simple matter of a stray dog looking for warmth. There was something in that posture and the unwavering gaze, a sentinel's presence. The image lingered in his mind, urging him to step out to approach. But the clock on his dashboard reminded him of the other routes still to cover. He sat for a moment longer, committing the scene to memory, before easing the car forward. In his rearview mirror, the figure remained. The German shepherd ears, high eyes, steady framed in mist. And something in that moment told Adrian the day ahead would be different. He did not yet know that within days this silent figure would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would change not only the town, but him as well. The next morning, the mist lay over Glenford once more like a thin shawl draped across every rooftop and stone street. Dew clung to white fences and bare branches, sparkling faintly in the dim light of dawn. Adrian began his shift earlier than usual, as he often did since moving back. The low hum of the patrol car's engine blended with the winter wind, curling through the narrow lanes. Almost without thinking, he steered toward St. Helena's Chapel. Yesterday's image still sat heavy in his mind, refusing to fade. He wanted to know if the dog, the sentinel before the wooden doors, was still there. As the car rounded the bend, he lifted his gaze. Through the pale mist, it was there again. The same stance, the same watchfulness. The shepherd's amber coat caught what little morning light there was, standing out against the cold gray stone. It stood firmly, paws planted on the damp earth tail, hanging low, but twitching slightly, alert. Adrian pulled over his eyes, tracing every detail. The ears were fixed forward, tuned to catch the slightest sound. But it was the eyes that held him. Deep, steady, carrying something between vigilance and a plea. It was not a gaze cast into empty space, but one that reached straight through to whoever met it. He stepped out, the soft thud of the car door breaking the hush. Dry leaves rolled across the ground, stirred by the wind. The dog turned its head toward him, eyes unchanged, body unmoving. No bark, no lunge. Only a deliberate stillness, as though every movement was a choice. Adrian moved forward slowly, keeping just enough distance so the dog wouldn't feel pressured. He had encountered many kinds of dogs over the course of his career, from gentle family pets to highly trained working canines. But in this one, there was a rare blend, the sharp intelligence of a German shepherd mixed with an unusual calm and patience. Up close, he noticed the fur along the dog's back was darker, forming a pattern like a draped cloak, while the chest and belly carried a warm golden hue. Its deep brown eyes caught the light through the mist, watching him as if weighing his presence. He stopped a few meters away, crouching slightly, his voice low and steady. "Hey, buddy. What are you keeping watch over here?" The dog tilted its head just a fraction, listening perhaps, but never breaking eye contact. There was something urgent in that gaze, as if it wanted to convey something important, but had no words to give. Adrian could feel the insistence in it, even if he couldn't yet understand why. He let his eyes drift to the chapel door behind the animal. The old wooden panels were scarred with faint scratches, the brass handle tarnished by years of weather. Everything was still. The place only opened on weekends for the Sunday morning service, so there should have been nothing unusual inside. He wondered who the dog belonged to and why it would stay in one place for so long. In Glenford, most dogs wore collars and were walked in the mornings. This one was uncollared, untethered, and yet its stance and gaze felt as if it were guarding something unseen or waiting for someone to return. A cold gust rolled past, clouding his breath into the air. Adrian pulled his coat collar higher, keeping his eyes on the shepherd. The dog lifted one front paw, set it back down its tail, giving a small, slower sweep, but it never left its post. He tried one more step forward, and this time the dog moved. Not to retreat, but to angle its body toward the side of the chapel, glancing at the narrow space there before looking back at Adrian. The gesture was subtle, but it gave him the uncanny feeling of being guided. Still, his training held him back. He knew better than to wander onto private property without cause, especially church grounds. And so far, there was no sign of an emergency. The dog stayed there a while longer, then turned back toward the chapel door. That look, both watchful and almost pleading, kept him rooted longer than he intended. It reminded him of old cases when a single overlooked detail could send an investigation spiraling in the wrong direction. From somewhere across the square, the slow chime of the clock tower drifted through the mist. Adrian knew he had to continue his route, but his thoughts stayed behind. He stepped back toward the car, and before opening the door, gave the dog one last look. Same stance, same gaze, as if trying to brand a silent message into his mind. When the engine rumbled to life, he pulled away slowly. In the rearview mirror, the amber-coated shepherd still stood there, unmoving, a living statue in the rain-softened light. A thought flickered through him. If the dog was there again tomorrow, he would get closer, and maybe finally learn the reason behind that gaze. The fog thickened ahead, but somewhere deep inside, Adrian felt a thread pulling between them. A thread that made him believe Glenford's quiet mornings were about to turn a page, and that the shepherd, though he didn't yet know its name was Max, would be the one to lead him there. The next morning, Glenford lay under a sky the color of worn wool. Light rain began to fall, clinging to the patrol car's windshield in a fine spray, leaving pale trails when the wipers swept past. Damp air slipped through the window seam, bringing with it the scent of wet earth and resin from the distant forest. Adrian slowed as he drove east. The slick cobblestones whispered under the tires, the sound scattering into the stillness. From afar, the dark roofline of St. Helena's emerged, streaked with rain, its stained glass windows blurred by rivulets of water. And then he saw it. Before the chapel's wooden doors, the German shepherd stood once more, proud, unyielding, despite the cold rain. Its golden amber coat was darkened now, rainwater tracing down the black saddle of its back, gathering in droplets along the fur at its neck and chest. The ears were still high, the body as fixed as if no time had passed since yesterday. Adrian stopped the car engine idling, eyes locked on the sight. There was something in that persistence, part admiration, part deepening curiosity. He cut the engine, lifted his collar, and stepped out. Rain needled against his face and hands, but he hardly noticed. He approached the chapel steps slowly, careful not to break the dog's trust. Under the rain, its eyes seemed even clearer, sharpened by the glint of water. The name Max surfaced unbidden in Adrian's mind. When he came within a few meters, the shepherd stepped back once, then again, eyes never leaving his. Then, without warning, it turned sharply left, slipping toward the narrow path along the chapel's side. Adrian hesitated for only a moment before following. His shoes skidded slightly on moss-slick stones, the rain's steady patter mixing with his footsteps. Max moved at a measured pace, far from fleeing, always keeping a distance Adrian could match, and every so often glanced over its shoulder, as if checking that he was still there. The side passage was darker, hemmed in by tall stone walls damp with moss. The air carried the scent of wet wood and aged metal. Max stopped near a recess at the chapel's corner, where a small wooden hatch sat low against the ground. The shepherd stood beside it, looking down, then back up at Adrian's tail, giving a single slow wave. Adrian stepped closer, lowering himself until one knee rested on the wet ground, his palm pressed against the cold wood. At first there was only the faint patter of rain above, but as he focused, another sound began to emerge. Faint, muffled, yet undeniably there. It was a soft tapping, uneven, broken by small pauses, and between those taps came a faint vibration, like the shifting of someone confined in a narrow space. A chill ran down his spine. He lifted his head, met Max's eyes, then pressed his ear against the wood again. The sound remained, weak but persistent. The kind of rhythm that spoke of intent, as though someone on the other side was trying to send a signal. He stepped back, scanning the area. The small wooden hatch was old, secured by a rusted iron latch. Beneath it, the damp earth showed cracks where thin blades of grass had found their way through. Adrian's instincts told him there was likely a storage space or cellar beyond it, one that ran beneath the chapel's foundation. Max stood close, eyes fixed on his every move. Without a word, Adrian understood the dog had brought him here for a reason. What he was hearing could very well be human, and if it was, someone was trapped down there. He rose, drawing in a slow breath to steady himself against the cold rain and the rising urgency pressing at his chest. His training told him to report this to seek official clearance before touching church property. Yet another part of him, the part that had chased down leads in back alleys and followed hunches others would dismiss, urged him to act now, because every beat of that tapping carried the weight of desperation. Max shifted forward, nose pointing toward the hatch as if underlining the point. The combination of watchfulness and pleading in his gaze had never been clearer. Rain slid down the back of Adrian's neck as he stood there, knowing this was only the beginning, and a beginning he couldn't turn away from. Questions were already lining up in his mind. Who was down there? How long had they been trapped? And how did Max know exactly where to lead him? He took several steps back, sweeping his eyes across the scene to lock every detail into memory. It felt like standing before a door into something long hidden. Max didn't move, his gaze steady on Adrian's face, as though passing on a silent assignment. Adrian gave a small nod to himself before turning toward the main path, rain streaming off his shoulders. He would need to prepare before coming back. But he would return, and next time that door would not be closed. The rain drummed steadily on the roof of St. Helena's, running in long streams, down worn channels, and spilling onto the slick stone below. Beneath its steady hiss, Adrian knelt once again beside the hatch, his hand pressed firmly to its chilled surface. This time he leaned in closer, eyes shut to block out every sound but what came from within. At first it was the rain and the wind threading through the cracks in the walls. Then in the brief stillness between gusts it came again, clearer now than the day before. The tapping. Not strong, not perfectly timed, but deliberate like a code. 1, 2. Then a pause. Another tap, slower, followed by a faint metallic rasp, as if something had brushed against iron. He shifted his head, pressing his ear to the adjoining stone wall. From within came another sound, deeper drawn out. The sound of labored breathing, cut through with muffled, choked sobs. Even with the heavy stone between them, the emotion bled through. His chest tightened. Someone was crying. Max pressed closer, his body angled toward the hatch, trembling slightly as though restraining a stronger urge to act. Rain clung to his coat in dark, heavy patches, but his eyes burned bright, urging Adrian to move. There was no doubt left. This was no curiosity or vague suspicion. This was the sharp certainty that someone was trapped below. Years in investigations had taught him that in moments like this, every minute mattered, and hesitation could cost a life. He stood and stepped back to take in the full structure. The stone wall along the chapel's side rose high and seamless without any major cracks. The hatch was the only access, its hinges eaten with rust, yet holding fast. He crouched again, inspecting them. Weathered, corroded, but too solid to break bare-handed. A cold gust carried the damp scent of moss and rotting wood. From the narrow seam beneath the hatch came the tang of rust and the stale, suffocating air of an enclosed space. Adrian glanced at Max. The shepherd had not shifted, every muscle taut, guarding something unseen. Pieces were sliding into place. A strange dog, standing watch at the chapel for days, in rain and cold. A locked hatch in an overlooked corner. The faint but unmistakable sounds of tapping and crying. And the creeping chill that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It wasn't yet a complete picture, but every shade pointed toward danger. He lowered himself once more, ear to the hinge side crack. The sounds inside had changed, quicker, more urgent, as though whoever was down there had realized someone was close. A sob escaped, sharp and trembling, then silence. His heart thudded in response like a bell struck deep within. He stepped back again, fists tightening. The sense of racing against time was now a steady pressure in his chest. If someone was truly confined here, their condition might already be dire. Cold ground, damp air, no light, little air. All of it spelled danger. Adrian swept his gaze over the scene one last time, committing every detail for his report and request for access. But under the officer's discipline, a personal instinct clawed upward. The urge to break the lock now, to tear the door open, to pull whoever was down there into the rain and air. He knew he would have to balance the rules against that instinct. But with every tap from below, the balance was tipping fast. Max stepped forward, standing alongside him, ears still pricked high. The patter of rain on the chapel roof merged with the thrum of Adrian's heartbeat in his ears, creating a tight, suspended moment. He bent closer, speaking softly as if to both himself and the dog. "We'll come back. And next time, we won't just stand here listening." For an instant, Max's eyes glinted as though he understood every word. He leaned once more toward the wooden hatch, then stepped back when Adrian turned away. On the walk back to the car, urgency clung to Adrian like a taut wire. Each step on the slick stone echoed heavily in his mind. He knew that once he had heard a cry for help, he no longer had the right to ignore it. And somewhere deep inside, he was certain of one thing. Time for the person beneath was running out faster than he imagined. Back at the Glenford Police Department, Adrian strode quickly through the old tiled hallway, wet shoe prints marking his path. In his head, the faint tapping and muffled sobbing still pulsed with each breath following him like a shadow. The station was calm this morning, but he knew he was about to shatter that calm. At the duty desk, Lieutenant Carter, long familiar with Adrian's composed demeanor, looked up, his brow furrowing at the gravity in his expression. "What is it?" Cole Adrian set a hand on the desk's edge, lowering his voice. "I need to report a serious situation. There's a strong possibility someone is being unlawfully held in the cellar beneath St. Helena's Chapel." Carter paused, focus sharpening. Adrian gave a concise account, Max's unyielding vigil at the door, the tapping and choked crying from below, the damp chill seeping out from the wooden hatch. He left nothing out, pressing on the urgency like a gut-born alarm. After a few silent seconds, Carter nodded. "I'll contact the local court for a search warrant. But be ready for anything. It could be more dangerous than we expect." While Carter began making calls, Adrian pulled out his phone, reaching his most trusted colleagues, 3 officers who had worked rescues with him before and knew how to operate in tight, high-risk environments. The plan came together quickly. 2 teams, one to move directly on the hatch at the chapel's side, the other to secure the perimeter and provide support. The gear list included crowbars, bolt cutters, high-powered flashlights, a handheld camera to document the scene, and a first aid kit in case they found victims needing immediate care. Adrian made sure to add a portable oxygen and toxic gas detector to the list. He didn't know how deep the cellar went, but experience told him low oxygen or toxic buildup could be as deadly as the confinement itself. When he stepped back outside, Max was already there, as if he had known Adrian would return. His amber coat still carried a trace of the morning rain, but his eyes were bright alert. Adrian gave a small smile and crouched to meet his gaze. "All right, partner. Today we work together." Max took a step forward, tail giving a slow wave, but his eyes never left Adrian's face. In them, Adrian saw companionship, not like a pet, but like a teammate who understood the mission. When Carter emerged with the signed search warrant, Adrian tucked it into his coat. The team gathered in the garage, patrol cars lined in readiness. Spreading a map across a hood, Adrian marked the hatch location, the narrow path along the chapel's side, and the possible danger points. He assigned each role: radio contact, lock breaching, video recording, first aid coverage. Before heading out, Adrian glanced at Max, who had stayed at his side since they left the office. Though they'd never formally trained together, the bond was already there, unseen, but unshakable. Max sat by his feet, ears high, eyes steady with anticipation. "Let's move," Adrian said, an order for the team and a promise to Max. The small convoy rolled from the station tires, hissing through puddled streets. On the way to St. Helena's, Adrian mentally checked each piece of gear running through scenarios: a victim in critical condition, a partially collapsed cellar, or even a hostile suspect barricaded inside. In the back seat, Max kept his gaze on the window, ears swiveling to catch every sound outside. Every so often, Adrian caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, calm but sharp like a sentinel. Somehow the dog's presence steadied him, strengthening the resolve of the whole team. By the time they reached the chapel, the rain had eased, but the sky hung low and gray. The air was thick and cold, with thin trails of water still tracing the stone walls. Adrian signaled for the vehicles to stop a safe distance away, out of clear view. He and Carter led the approach along the narrow path, Max shadowing each step, his stride silent and sure. Standing before the weathered hatch, Adrian took the warrant from his coat, scanning it once more as if to anchor himself to the authority and responsibility it granted. His pulse slowed, then began to climb as his hand touched the rusted latch. "Everyone ready," he said quietly, eyes meeting each of his teams in turn. Max stood just ahead, gaze fixed on the door body, leaning forward like an arrow drawn to a bowstring. In the brief silence, Adrian knew that from this moment on, nothing would be the same. The gray sky pressed low over Glenford mist pooling on the chapel roof. The team moved to the side wall, boots sinking into the rain-softened earth. Drops still fell from the trees overhead, ticking against the leaves like a countdown. Adrian led Max close at his right, the shepherd's frame taut with energy. The hatch loomed before them, a dark seam in the stone wall. The iron lock, mottled brown with rust, looked larger and heavier than Adrian remembered. He motioned for the team to fan out. 2 at the path's entrance, 1 directing the flashlight beam onto the hinges, the rest readying the tools to break it open. Adrian dropped to one knee, pressing his ear once more to the narrow gap. Almost instantly, the sound came, pounding from within this time, sharp and urgent. The blows landed in rapid succession, like a desperate code mingled with muffled sobs and ragged breaths. A pressure tightened in his chest. He lifted his head, meeting Carter's eyes. "We need to move, now." Metal clanged as the crowbar wedged into the lock. The rescue officer, his hands calloused from countless operations, threw his weight into the leverage. But the lock barely shifted, the hinges welded in place by years of rust as if they'd been untouched for decades. Max paced restlessly, nose sweeping close to the ground, ears swiveling to catch every sound from within. Suddenly, a loud thud from behind the door made the whole team freeze for a heartbeat. Adrian knew the people inside had heard them and were trying with all their strength to answer back. "Bolt cutters," he ordered. Steel bit into steel with a grating screech, each cut sending a shudder through the lock. Yet the chain wrapped tightly outside remained stubborn. One of the team swung a sledgehammer, striking the latch in heavy echoing blows. The sound ricocheted off the stone walls, merging with the pounding from inside into one urgent rhythm. Sweat began to bead along Adrian's temple despite the cold air clinging to his skin. The weight of every second pressed down like a tightening cord. Each knock from inside was another plea, and he felt the burden of them settling on his shoulders. Carter switched positions with the man on the crowbar, attacking the hinge from a different angle. The hinges screamed, the door shuddering more than before. Adrian crouched lower, cutting through the last stubborn links with the bolt cutters. The team moved in practiced silence, their coordination flowing through quick glances and sharp gestures. Max stood forward of the line, eyes locked on the hatch legs, bent as if ready to spring the moment it gave way. At the hammer's final strike, the shepherd leaned forward, panting lightly into the tense air. A sharp crack split through the rain-dampened stillness, metal giving way. The lock sagged, the latch tearing free from its hinge. Carter heaved a final push, and the hatch flew open with a heavy, resonant thud. Cold, stale air rushed out from the darkness beyond, thick enough to touch. Adrian's flashlight beam cut into it, revealing a narrow wooden staircase descending into the earth. From deep below came the thin sounds of crying and faint voices, confirmation of everything they'd feared. Adrian drew a breath, glanced at Max. The shepherd now poised at the threshold, ears high, gaze tunneling into the dark. He gripped Carter's shoulder, signaling. "Let's go. Every second matters now." The wooden steps groaned under their weight, the air clinging damp and stale in every breath. Light from the flashlights swept over moss-darkened stone, probing every shadow. Adrian led Carter at his back, 2 more officers carrying medical gear and spare lighting. Max padded alongside Adrian, each step steady, nose testing the air ahead. At the bottom, the space opened into a low, narrow room. In the wavering light, shapes came into focus. Thin, trembling figures huddled close together. Some clasped their knees, others wrapped arms around themselves, wide-eyed with fear. All of them were girls, many heartbreakingly young. "Police," Adrian called out, his voice clear but gentle. "You're safe now." A few heads lifted, hesitant, as though afraid to believe. One girl, hair tangled, face hollow from hunger, squinted against the beam. "Are we really going outside?" she whispered. Carter nodded, draping a thermal blanket over her shoulders. The others began to stir, murmurs weaving with choked sobs. When the words, "You're safe," came again, the dam broke. Some cried openly. Others clutched one another's hands as if to anchor themselves in the moment. Thin hands gripped the officers as they helped each girl to her feet. Adrian's gaze swept the cellar. Cold earth floor, a few rotting mattresses in a corner, a bucket of cloudy water, scattered food wrappers. The air was suffocating the space, claustrophobic. Every second here had been an ordeal. "Form a line. We'll take you up first," Adrian reassured, his voice firm but steady. Max positioned himself at the exit, scanning each face as they passed, ears flicking with every step. Each time a girl drew near, he leaned forward to sniff lightly, then stepped aside. In this quiet way, Max became the unseen sentinel, counting them out by instinct. The first steps onto the staircase were heavy, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of disbelief. Near the top, daylight spilled in, making several girls raise their hands to shield their eyes. The winter air struck their skin, but it carried something else, the sharp, undeniable scent of freedom. One girl stepped out, drawing a deep breath as if to drink the air whole. Another touched the chapel's outer wall, then broke into sobs. Bare feet pressed into wet grass, the smell of earth and fallen leaves mingling with the relief they'd longed for. Outside, the backup team moved quickly, wrapping blankets, passing bottles of water, offering biscuits. A young female officer knelt to gently wipe mud from a child's trembling hands. Words of thanks tumbled out, sometimes swallowed in tears, but every one of them hung heavy in the air. Adrian climbed the last step, watching the final girl emerge into the light. Max still held position by the hatch, his gaze steady. When the last one was clear, the shepherd eased back his eyes, saying without words that his mental tally was complete. "If we'd been any later?" Carter murmured beside him. Adrian nodded, his eyes still following the survivors. They were frail, but in their eyes now was a faint spark, the kind only life returned could ignite. As the ambulances rolled away toward the medical center, Adrian lingered, breathing in the cold air. At his side, Max looked up, the amber gold in his coat catching the pale winter light. "Good work, Max," Adrian said softly. The shepherd's tail gave a slight wave before his gaze shifted toward the forest beyond the chapel, as if sensing there were still secrets yet to be uncovered. The wail of ambulance sirens echoed through Glenford's narrow streets, carrying 40 girls away from the suffocating darkness beneath St. Helena's Chapel. On the soaked grass, their muddy footprints remained etched like proof of a chapter of pain now closed. Adrian stood near the open cellar hatch, watching his team pack away their tools. Carter was speaking with the forensics unit about sealing the scene while other officers swept the surrounding grounds. Everything seemed to be settling into order, yet a faint restlessness threaded through Adrian's thoughts, as if part of the picture was still missing. Max stayed close, but his ears were rigid, his gaze unsettled. Since the victims had been brought into daylight, the shepherd hadn't stopped scanning the thin forest behind the chapel. Every so often he sniffed the air, freezing for a few seconds, as if listening to something only he could hear. Without warning, Max leaned forward, took a sharp breath, and bolted toward the trees. His amber gold coat caught briefly in the dim afternoon light before vanishing into the damp trunks. Max, Adrian called out, his voice carrying into the open air. The dog didn't turn. Instead, the sound of paws breaking through dry leaves echoed away, steady and deliberate. Adrian could feel it. Max wasn't running aimlessly. He was locked onto something driven by a purpose. Carter approached, frowning. "What's going on?" Max has picked up a scent. Adrian replied without hesitation. "I'm going after him." He tightened his coat, checked his radio, and strode into the tree line. Two young officers, Dawson and Hale, quickly joined him. Together they followed the path Max had taken, eyes combing for signs. Dog tracks pressed into the rain-soft earth, threaded with the scent of wet wood and forest rot. Occasionally a sharp, clipped bark rang out ahead. Max's way of guiding them in. Each bark sent Adrian's pulse higher. Max only did this when he'd found something worth following. As they pushed deeper, the canopy thickened, stealing the light. Cold seeped into the shadows, carrying the sour tang of damp soil. Max appeared ahead, frozen beside the thick base of an old tree. His head turned toward a narrow trail nearly swallowed by undergrowth. Adrian quickened his pace, kneeling beside him. "What is it, buddy?" Max glanced back at him, amber eyes bright before fixing on the overgrown path again. "The message clear? This way." Hale pushed aside the tangled branches to reveal a faint trail leading deeper into the woods. Fresh boot prints marked the soil, and snagged on a thorny branch was a scrap of torn fabric. Adrian lifted it, still cold and wet. A sign someone had passed through recently. "This isn't random," he said firmly. "We're not done here." No more words were needed. They shifted formation, letting Max lead. The shepherd moved quickly, pausing now and then to keep them close. Evening forest sounds surrounded them. The rustle of leaves, the sudden clatter of startled birds. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, perhaps toward a crucial lead or a waiting threat. But turning back was unthinkable. Carter's voice crackled through the radio from the perimeter. "If you spot anything dangerous, call it in. I'll send backup." "Copy," Adrian replied, keeping his voice short. They followed the trail until the trees thinned into a small clearing. Max stopped at the edge body. Low eyes fixed ahead. The silence hit Adrian first. No rustle of leaves, no distant calls of birds. Just the wind threading through dry branches and their own breathing. Every nerve in his body sharpened. Something lay ahead, and Max had felt it first. By late afternoon, Glenford's forest was swallowing the light, the interlaced canopy blocking the pale silver sky. A northern wind slid through the leaves, cold and damp, striking his cheek like tiny blades. The ground shifted between mats of rotting leaves and slick mud, each step leaving a deep print with a faint wet rustle. Max darted forward, steady as an arrow slicing through shadows. His amber gold coat was now only a flicker between the dark trunks. Every so often, a short bark cut through the air, precise measured. A signal for the men trailing him. Adrian kept close, his breath curling into white plumes in the cold. Years of night patrols had taught him to navigate treacherous terrain, but the forest was a gauntlet. Roots twisted like snares, slopes slick as oil, low branches whipping across his arms. Dawson and Hale stayed tight, pushing through brush when the path closed in. A gust swept down the trail, rattling the canopy. Through that rush, Max's bark came again, sharper, now pulling them faster. It was both a guide and an urgent summons. Cold threaded through Adrian's jacket, filling each breath. His hand ached against the chill as he gripped the radio, relaying coordinates to Carter. But his focus was fixed ahead, on what Max was leading them to, something the first rescue hadn't touched. Then Max veered sharply off the trail into denser growth. Leaves crunched underfoot, twigs snapped. Adrian ducked beneath a low limb, skidding slightly down a muddy slope. His boots sank, but he caught himself and pushed forward. "Careful, it's slick," he called back to Dawson and Hale. Ahead, Max's barking turned rapid, layered with the pounding of his paws. The shepherd was no longer pacing. He was closing in. A thin thread of smoke drifted on the wind, carrying the faint scent of burned wood. Adrian halted for half a second, locking eyes with Hale, before all three plunged onward. They broke into a small patch of open ground, where the dying light fell in weak, fractured shafts, each breath hanging pale in the cold air. Dawson stumbled into a shallow pit, loose soil and stones clattering down its side. Adrian grabbed his arm, hauling him back up without breaking stride. Max's shape flashed ahead once more. The shepherd flicked a quick glance over his shoulder, confirming they were still on his trail, then pushed forward. His barking grew more urgent, and a ripple of tension crawled up Adrian's spine. Faint sounds began to reach them, hurried footfalls, or perhaps something being dragged across the ground. They were closing in. A razor-edged gust swept through, rattling the branches and shaking down beads of cold water. The smoke scent was stronger now, laced with damp fabric and the earthy musk of the forest floor. Adrian knew they were approaching the point where the trail would break open, the place where the truth waited. Max stopped abruptly, dropping low, a low growl rumbling in his throat before he barked sharply, gaze fixed on the darkness ahead where the trees hung like a curtain. Adrian signaled Dawson and Hale to halt, all three holding their breath to listen. Wind. Heartbeats. And then, the faint thud of a wooden door closing. Adrian tightened his grip on the flashlight, tension pulled taut like a bowstring. Max stood, braced, muscles hard under his coattail, making a slight, deliberate flick. A signal he was ready. Through the tangle of trunks, a small clearing opened, and there it was. A weathered wooden cabin crouched like a ghost in the cold. Its gray boards were warped and rotted in places, the roof listing faint light leaking through its gaps. Thin smoke curled from a squat chimney, blending into the mist and deepening the chill of the scene. Max froze at the clearing's edge. Body low, ears high, amber eyes locked ahead. He was nearly motionless, save for a slow tail flick and the strong, steady breaths drawing in the scent. Adrian knelt, resting a hand on the dog's tense shoulder, feeling muscles strung tight as a drawn bow. "Someone's in there," he murmured, eyes fixed on the cabin. Through the lattice of leaves, they caught sight of a man standing just inside the door, the faint gleam of metal in his hand. His face was gaunt, his eyes restless, sweeping the tree line as if expecting trouble. His stance leaned forward, both hands gripping the weapon like he meant to put down anyone who appeared. "We've got the element of surprise," Hale whispered. "But we go in careful." Dawson signaled to circle left and cut off escape. Adrian nodded, keeping Max steady. The shepherd shivered slightly, gaze never leaving the sentry, breathing fast but controlled. Every sign of a dog coiled to strike if needed. Wind rippled the leaves overhead, shadow patterns shifting over the ground. Dusk's light was fading fast, offering the team a natural cover. Adrian placed each step with care, avoiding brittle twigs, scanning for more clues. As they drew closer, he spotted a small side door hanging ajar, wide enough for someone to slip through. Inside came the faint creak of footsteps and the dry shuffle of paper. Someone moving documents or a map. Hale leaned close and whispered, He might not be alone. Adrian gave a slight nod, fingers tightening around flashlight and radio. Carter's voice crackled in his earpiece from the perimeter rescue teams closing in. "But if it turns urgent, you move." A short bark cut through. Max. He hadn't moved from his crouch, but now fixed his eyes on the side door, then back to Adrian. The signal was clear. Adrian gestured for Dawson to close from behind while he and Hale moved for the side entrance. His pulse picked up as the gap closed to mere meters. Wind heartbeats and footsteps folded into one quickening rhythm. The man at the front door stayed in position, eyes scanning. Then suddenly he turned toward the side, frowning, as if he'd sensed something. At that same moment, a metallic clatter sounded inside, the fall of something heavy to the wooden floor. No more time. Adrian met Hale's eyes and nodded once. In a blur, Max burst forward like a streak of living amber, crossing the clearing in seconds. His bark ripped through the hush, jolting the sentry. The man spun, weapon rising, but Max was already on him, driving him back into the cabin. Adrian and Hale swept in through the side flashlight beams, cutting across a cramped, dust-thick room. On the table lay a spread map marked with red ink. Locations scattered across the outskirts. Beside it, a half-open metal case revealed bundles of documents and portable hard drives. The sentry retreated to a corner, eyes flashing uncertainty as all three officers closed in. Max stood between him and the exit, a low growl threading from his chest, eyes never leaving the target. "Drop the weapon." "Now," Adrian said, voice deep and final. The air felt dense, the walls pressing close. Outside, the wind hissed through the forest. Inside, the floorboards groaned under the stillness. The man's gaze darted between the officers and the dog blocking his path. He drew a hard breath, shoulders tight, fingers locked on the grip tendons, ridging along his forehead. "Put it down." Adrian repeated each word, clipped with intent. No reply, only a sideways shift, a glint of calculation in his eyes. Dawson stepped right to block. Hale lowered his stance, ready for a sudden move. Max gave a short, sharp growl, his amber coat bristling, faintly tail-rigid weight pitched forward like an arrow about to fly. His focus was unbroken. Every twitch of the man's body was under watch. The silence cracked when the man jerked his arm, lifting the weapon. In the same breath, Max launched. His paws struck the boards with a thud, closing the distance in an instant, slamming into the man's torso. The impact jarred the weapon free. It clattered to the floor with a metallic crash. Hale moved in, driving the man into the wall, while Dawson dropped to one knee, snapping cuffs onto his wrists. Max stayed poised, still, guarding eyes locked on the subdued suspect, until Adrian gave the release signal. Harsh breaths filled the cabin. Outside, the wind tore harder through the trees, branches knocking together with dry, splintered sounds. Carter's voice cut in over the radio from the perimeter. "What's your status? Suspect is in custody." "We've recovered maps and data," Adrian replied, his eyes following Hale as he examined the metal case. Inside the case lay files marked with coded symbols and several small hard drives. Spread across the table, the map was dotted with red marks connected by thin lines. A web-like network stretching across the outskirts. The man was now face down on the wooden floor, breathing hard. A few stray hairs from Max's thick coat clung to his cheek, proof of the swift takedown. Adrian crouched beside him, locking eyes. "This is the end for you, and the beginning of the truth we're going to bring to light." Max stepped back slightly, but his gaze stayed locked on the suspect. In that moment, Adrian felt the unspoken precision between them. No wasted orders, no excess words, only instinct and trust. Engines rumbled closer outside as the rescue convoy arrived. Carter's team moved in, taking charge of the suspect and securing all evidence. Adrian placed a hand on Max's shoulder, feeling the steadying warmth beneath the rain-damp fur. But when his eyes swept the map again, instinct told him this was far from over. There were more red dots than they'd realized, and they were waiting to be found. The cabin had fallen silent except for the hiss of wind, seeping through warped planks and the shuffle of investigators combing the room. On the stained wooden table, the map still lay open, creased and worn from heavy use. A sweep of a flashlight brought the red marks and connecting lines into stark relief against the yellowed paper. Adrian stepped closer, studying the symbols. Not all the marks were near Glenford. Some lay in the outer suburbs and others far into neighboring towns. The connecting lines formed a mesh as though marking routes or zones under control. Hale pulled a chair up and dropped a stack of case files onto the table. These are the unresolved missing persons reports from the last 5 years. I want to cross-reference them. Dawson flipped through the pages, stopping at faded photos of victims. Young women, some barely past childhood. All vanished under mysterious circumstances. They began matching the last known locations of the victims against the red marks on the map. Within minutes, the pattern was undeniable. Nearly every red mark fell within a 5-kilometer radius of a disappearance site. A cold current traced up Adrian's spine. This was no random map. It was a plan or a record belonging to an organized network. Max lay near the door, head resting between his front paws, amber eyes tracking every movement. From time to time, his ears pricked sharply at faint sounds from outside. Adrian glanced his way, recognizing the vigilance that hadn't eased despite the lull. "We need to get this map and all data back to the station immediately," Adrian said, his tone resolute. "This could be the key to the whole case." Carter stepped in carrying an evidence bag, leaning over the table for a look. A low whistle escaped him. "If all these points connect, we're looking at something much bigger than we imagined." Hale nodded, tapping 3 red marks clustered together. "These are all near the eastern forest. At least 4 disappearances have been reported in that zone over the last 2 years. Adrian carefully folded the map, sliding it into a moisture-proof evidence pouch. It was treated as critical. One mishandled detail, and the network could vanish from sight. Max rose and padded over, pressing his nose briefly to the pouch as if to memorize its scent. Adrian's smile was faint, but genuine as he scratched behind the dog's ears. "Good work, my friend. Without you, we wouldn't have made it here." Max's eyes gleamed with a quiet steadiness, as if he understood that what they'd uncovered was only the beginning. Outside, dusk had turned the forest gold, the last shafts of sunlight spilling through the trees to warm the thin crust of snow. From afar came the sounds of recovery vehicles and forensic teams, the investigation's next phase already in motion. Adrian stepped out of the cabin, glancing back once. In the fading light, it looked like a scar etched into the forest, and the map was its silent confession. He knew that by nightfall, the rest of the network would realize one link had been broken, and that meant the true hunt was only beginning. The next morning, the Glenford Police Department's conference room blazed under white ceiling lights. On the far wall, the recovered cabin map had been enlarged and pinned in place, every red mark and fine line clearly visible. Around the table sat officers, detectives, and representatives from the FBI and nearby state forces. Adrian stood at the board, pointer in hand, his focus unwavering. Below him, Max lay by his boots, head lifted, amber-tipped ears pricked as if absorbing every word. The air was heavy with concentration and the weight of what they were facing. This was no longer a small-town case. "These are all the marked locations?" Adrian began, his voice steady, cross-referencing them with unresolved missing persons files from 3 neighboring states. "We have a match in at least 70% of cases. This suggests the network we're dealing with operates across state lines." A state officer leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Do we think this is one single ring or multiple groups working together?" Hale, who was heading up the hard drive data analysis, spoke from the side. "We can't confirm yet, but there's strong evidence pointing to a centralized command structure. A leader, intermediaries, and coordinated operations. On the table stacks of case files, crime scene photographs, and investigation reports lay in neat piles." Dawson flipped quickly through one folder, pointing out that many of the red dots overlapped with major transport routes. Ideal for moving victims without drawing attention. Max shifted slightly, his amber eyes lifting toward the wall map, as if he could sense the tension rippling through the room. Adrian reached down, rubbing the shepherd's head, feeling that steady warmth like a reminder. No matter how heavy the pressure, the goal was always the same: to bring people home alive. The FBI proposed a multi-state joint task force dividing the red dot clusters into zones, each under a dedicated team. Adrian was assigned to lead the northern sector. 3 linked marks that intelligence flagged as a core area for the network's operations. Carter, handling logistics, spoke plainly. "We'll need secure comms, rapid response transport, and a technical unit to crack the encrypted data. We can't afford any leaks. One slip and they'll vanish before we can move." The weight settled across Adrian's shoulders. He knew every day lost meant smaller chances of finding the missing alive. But when Max looked up at him, those steady amber eyes holding absolute trust, it burned away at hesitation. In that gaze was a silent promise they wouldn't let a single lead slip. On the board, the plan took shape. Movement schedules, checkpoint positions, strike protocols for newly identified sites, and extraction routes to get survivors out quickly. Each team had a clear role, each operation an escape path already drawn. As the meeting drew to a close, Adrian scanned the room. The faces were tense, but the eyes were resolute. Everyone understood. This wasn't Glenford's fight alone anymore. This was everyone's fight. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes layering the streets in white. In that moment, Adrian felt the contrast sharply, the quiet beauty of the town and the storm quietly building beneath it. He leaned down and murmured to Max, "Stay ready. We've got work ahead." The shepherd's tail gave a slow wave, his amber gaze brightening. For him, the command was never in the words. It was in the rhythm of his handler's heartbeat and stride. That night, Glenford's sky was a swath of black velvet swallowing moon and stars. The truck depot on the outskirts was nearly swallowed in darkness, lit only by a few sputtering yellow lamps on rusted poles. From inside one of the warehouses came the droning hum of an old cooling unit mixing with the heavy scent of long-idled diesel engines. Adrian sat in the parked patrol car with the engine off, watching through infrared binoculars. Ahead, roughly 150 meters away, was an aging warehouse, one of the red dot sites from the cabin map. Its steel doors were shut tight, but from a narrow seam along one side, a faint white light blinked like machinery working inside. In the back seat, Max's lean, amber-coated frame blended into the shadows. His ears were up, eyes catching a far-off glow, nose working steadily as he drew in every trace of scent through the cracked window. Hale's voice came through softly on the radio. "East team in position. Dawson's covering south. You give the word, we move." Adrian gave a small nod, eyes never leaving the target. He knew this feeling well. The tense minutes before it all broke loose when the smallest sound could trigger the storm. Max suddenly shifted, locking his gaze on a dark corner behind the warehouse. Adrian read the signal instantly. He'd scented something. Leaning forward, Adrian gave the shepherd a quiet pat on the shoulder to hold position, then relayed into the radio. Possible movement at the rear. Dawson circle in slow, keep it quiet. Footsteps whispered faintly over comms. From his vantage point, Adrian spotted a lone man standing close to the wall, occasionally bending as if checking something. At his feet sat a large wooden crate, its side stamped with international freight markings, a shipment too suspicious to be coincidence. Max quivered faintly, muscles tensing ready for the release. Adrian chose to wait to be sure. Then the warehouse door cracked open. Two more figures emerged, hauling a medium-sized metal case. They spoke briefly, then began moving it toward a nearby truck. No more time to waste. Adrian keyed the mic voice firm. "Move!" His door flew open, and he and Max surged forward together. The shepherd led slicing across the open ground like a streak of gold in the dark. His bark exploded into the night, jolting the men into dropping the case with a ringing clang. Dawson came in from the south, blocking the truck. Hale's east team closed from both sides, flashlight beams carving through the shadows. One of the smugglers reached for something in his jacket, but before it cleared, Max was on him, slamming him down with sheer speed and precision. Adrian rushed in, snapping cuffs onto the man's wrists. Command's boots on concrete and the metallic clatter of gear filled the next seconds, but it was over in under 2 minutes. 3 suspects down the cargo intact. When the noise ebbed, Adrian turned to see Max by the metal case, his nose brushing the lock as if to say, "Here." Kneeling, Adrian saw the lead seal, untampered. Whatever was inside could be the key to the missing or worse proof of the network's trafficking. "Take it to the lab. Keep the seal intact," he ordered, eyes still locked on the crate. Overhead wind rose, dragging heavy clouds, low as if warning of what lay ahead. Adrian's hand found Max's shoulder, feeling the warm breath of the shepherd in the winter air. In just 4 days after the truck depot raid, Glenford and nearby towns were swept into the rapid current of coordinated rescues. The data from the seized case and the secret map unlocked a series of hidden sites, places law enforcement had never touched before. Every morning, the Joint Command Center glowed long before dawn. SWAT teams, state police, FBI agents, and relief workers rotated shifts without pause. On the central board, each blue pin marked a successful operation, and every new one meant another group of women stepping out from the shadows of captivity. Max hardly rested. At every raid site, he was always at the front nose, working hard to pick up traces invisible to the human eye. Once, when the tactical team was about to leave an abandoned wooden cabin after finding nothing, Max suddenly stopped at an old rug beneath a table and let out a low growl. When Adrian and Dawson lifted it, a wooden trap door was revealed. Beneath it was a cramped cellar where 3 young girls huddled together in the dark. News of the rescues spread quickly, though the authorities revealed minimal details to protect the victims. Each time the doors of a rescue van swung open, hollow-eyed faces were met with the light of freedom, and every reunion between victim and family brought the air to a standstill. One mother threw herself around her daughter, sobbing so hard she could not speak. A father simply stood frozen, his hands trembling as they touched the face of the child he had searched for over 3 years. Adrian witnessed it all. He had been part of many major cases before, but never had the value of each life returned felt so raw, so profound. Every smile, every tear was like a bright fragment against the grim backdrop they were working to erase. Even Hale, usually reserved, couldn't hide the emotion when a little girl ran straight to Max, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Thank you," through her sobs. Max stood still, letting the child cling to him, his amber eyes softening as if he understood he had just helped another small heart find its sky again. The rescues came without pause, sometimes 2 or 3 sites in a single day. Each team moved like gears in a perfectly meshed machine. Carter handled logistics, making sure food, warm blankets, and medical aid were ready at every reception point. Trauma counselors were on standby around the clock to guide survivors through the shock of the first hours. But beneath the rush, the pressure mounted quietly. Adrian knew that while many had been saved, red dots still marked the map. The network was not gone yet, and its orchestrator was still somewhere out there, watching their every move. On the final night of the operation cycle, as the last group of women in this round was driven away, Adrian stood beside Max, watching the van's taillights fade. The red strobe splashed across the snow, breaking into warm halos on the ground. He leaned down, brushing a hand over Max's neck. "We've done well, but there's still work ahead." Max lifted his head, wagged his tail, once his golden amber gaze like a small lantern in the dark, lighting the road ahead. In those last days, the interrogation rooms at the Glenford Police Department stayed lit until late into the night. One by one, suspects from the raids were brought in, their statements meticulously recorded. Most kept their heads down, staying silent or deflecting. But under the weight of time and evidence, some finally spoke names the authorities had only ever heard in passing. One name surfaced again and again: Marlo Kane, a shadow figure tied to illicit dealings across 3 states. The file on him was nearly empty, with only a few grainy security images, but enough for Adrian and the tactical team to know he was the keystone in the entire network. That morning, Carter burst into the command room, gripping a hot-off-the-wire bulletin from the state police network. He was just spotted at a gas station off the I-87 interstate. Camera picked up a license plate match. Without hesitation, Adrian called an all-units alert. 3 patrol cars were deployed, splitting into 2 intercept routes. Max was already in the back seat of Adrian's vehicle, ears high, drawing in the icy air through the cracked window. Barely 15 minutes later, Adrian had the black SUV in sight through his binoculars, speeding north. The highway was nearly empty, a thin frost on the pavement making tires squeal under hard braking. Front team block off at exit 14. Adrian relayed over the radio, eyes fixed on the target. Marlo seemed to sense the tail. His SUV suddenly accelerated, swerving left to overtake a semi before cutting hard to the right, avoiding the roadblock. Sirens wailed along the interstate, red and blue lights flashing across wet asphalt. "He's trying for the side road." Hale's voice crackled through comms. Adrian gripped the wheel and floored the accelerator. Max shifted slightly with the inertia, but his gaze stayed locked on the fleeing SUV. When Marlo veered into a service road leading to an abandoned industrial yard, Adrian stayed tight on him. The path narrowed, flanked by stacked shipping containers that walled off the view. Marlo weaved to gain space, but Dawson's unit appeared head-on, sealing the exit. Cornered, Marlo braked hard and jumped out, sprinting into the maze of steel. Adrian and Max followed instantly, their footsteps echoing between the towering containers. Marlo glanced back, saw Max closing the gap, and pulled a folding knife. But before he could fully square up, Max leapt, clamping onto the arm that held the blade, forcing it to the ground with a metallic clatter. Adrian closed in, taking Marlo down and locking cuffs on his wrists. Max stood guard breath warm against Adrian's shoulder, eyes never leaving the man until the threat was gone. "Marlo Kane, you're under arrest for human trafficking and multiple related charges," Adrian said, each word deliberate. Escorted back to the cars, Marlo stayed silent, but his cold stare told Adrian one thing: even with the head taken down, the rest of the network still lurked in the dark. Max hopped into the car ahead of him, tail flicking once, like a quiet sign of a job done. Adrian's hand rested on the shepherd's back, steadying himself for the battles still to come. News of Marlo Kane's capture spread like fire in the wind, and within days, the remaining links in the trafficking chain were dragged into the light. From his statements and those of his lieutenants, the authorities secured enough evidence to execute coordinated arrests across 3 neighboring states. Within less than a week, the map on the command room wall had almost completely changed color. The red pins, symbols of danger and darkness, were steadily removed, replaced with green marking. Each location freed, each life once trapped, now returned to the light. Adrian and Max joined the final missions of the operation. Though most targets were already clear and resistance had faded, Adrian kept his focus sharp, knowing that even a single misstep could turn the tide. At every scene, Max was still like a living compass, guiding them to the spots that needed checking, finding faint traces no human eye could detect. One gray afternoon, with the last of the winter sunlight slipping through the clouds, Adrian and Hale escorted the final group of suspects out of a derelict two-story house on the outskirts. As the transport van rumbled down the dirt road, Adrian realized the campaign had truly reached its end. The names that once filled the wanted list were all in custody, and the key evidence, from files and maps to communication devices, was safely secured. That evening, the command room no longer carried the taut weight it once held. Instead, there was the light sound of relieved laughter and firm handshakes between teammates. On the large screen, the final report glowed, "Operation complete. 114 victims rescued, all key figures apprehended." Adrian stood quietly by the table, his gaze instinctively searching for Max. The shepherd was lying nearby, head resting on his front paws, amber eyes calmly tracking every movement in the room. When their eyes met, Max's tail gave a slow wag as if to confirm he understood the success they had achieved. Adrian crouched, running a hand along the firm line of Max's back through the warm golden-brown fur with sable shading. Images came back to him in vivid flashes. Max at the front of raids, finding hidden entrances, subduing armed guards. Every advance in this campaign bore the mark of the shepherd's paws. "If it weren't for you, it wouldn't have been this complete," Adrian murmured. Outside, the night in Glenford was quieter than usual. The breeze carried the scent of wood smoke from lit fireplaces and the distant chime of St. Helena's church bells. Adrian knew this wasn't just the closing of a case. It was a turning point in the lives of hundreds, from the victims now free to the teammates who had endured every tense day together. Max lifted his head, eyes softening. Adrian returned the look with a rare smile before straightening. Tomorrow they would hand over the files to the court and return to routine duties. But in his heart, a new page had begun. One where Max was not only a partner, but an irreplaceable part of the journey toward justice. The next morning in Glenford carried a serenity Adrian hadn't felt in weeks. A thin veil of mist lay over the red-tiled rooftops, glowing faintly under the pale winter sun. St. Helena's bells rang out their notes, weaving through narrow alleys, mixing with the scent of fresh coffee from the corner cafe. Adrian stepped onto his porch with the leash in hand. Max was already waiting at the steps, his golden amber coat gleaming in the mist, breath curling into small clouds in the cold air. His gaze was bright, peaceful, far from the edge he had carried in the days of action. When Adrian held out his hand, Max tilted his head to let him fasten the clipped tail, giving a slow wag in readiness for their walk. They strolled through cobblestone streets where shutters were just beginning to open to the light. Residents who recognized them smiled and nodded in greeting. An elderly woman watering her bougainvillea called out warmly, "Thank you both for bringing peace back to this town." Adrian only smiled in return, though a quiet warmth spread through his chest. They turned toward St. Helena Chapel. The grass around it had been neatly cleared, the old cellar door sealed, and on the wall hung a memorial plaque for those rescued. Max paused, their ears pricking, as he sniffed the ground, as if confirming the place had truly changed. From the chapel, they followed the trail out to the edge of town, winding through the forest path. Sunlight filtered through tall branches, casting golden ribbons across the leaf-strewn ground. This was where they had chased Marlowe, where every pounding heartbeat and rush of wind still lingered in Adrian's memory. "We've been through a lot here, haven't we?" he said quietly. Max answered with a wag and a deep look, holding all those moments in silence. Their walk ended at the town square. The large Christmas tree still stood its blue ribbons, the color of the rescue operation, fluttering in the breeze. Children played around it, laughter ringing in the cold air. A few people came to stroke Max's fur and ask for photos. Adrian let him enjoy the attention, feeling as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. The memories would remain, but no longer as burdens. They were now bright markers of a battle fought and won. By the time they returned, the sun had burned away the last of the mist. Max walked beside him, steady and sure, their shadows stretching long over the stone pavement. Adrian knew that no matter what came tomorrow or months from now, they would keep walking forward together, like this morning, quiet but full of meaning. The celebration was set for a weekend morning when Glenford had fully settled back into its peaceful rhythm. From early hours, the town square filled with life. Blue and white flags waved from the buildings, and rows of chairs lined the shade beneath the old oak. Warm brass notes from the high school band mingled with the cheerful chatter of townsfolk arriving from every corner. Adrian led Max in from the south side of the square. Under the morning sun, Max's golden amber coat glowed his ears, high eyes, a blend of curiosity and calm. As they passed through the crowd, hands reached out to clasp Adrian's shoulder or stroke Max's back. The warmth wasn't just joy. It was deep gratitude. On stage, Glenford's mayor, Margaret Hill, stood behind a wooden podium adorned with fresh flowers. Her voice rang out clear and full of feeling. Today we are not only celebrating a victory over darkness, but honoring courage, perseverance, and the spirit of teamwork. In the town's darkest days, there were people, and one very special four-legged friend, who helped bring light back to this place. She gestured, and a large photograph appeared on the screen behind her, Max standing at the exit of St. Helena Chapel. Amber eyes catching the faint light with the rescued girls just behind him. For a few seconds, the square was silent. Then it erupted into long, heartfelt applause. Adrian stepped onto the stage with Max. He was still in his crisp police uniform, while Max wore a blue collar embroidered with the words, "Silent Guardian." The mayor smiled, presenting Max with a small round medal on a silver-blue ribbon. "Max, on behalf of the town of Glenford, we present to you the title of Silent Hero," Mayor Hill said gently, fastening the medal around his neck. Max tilted his head and wagged his tail slowly, as if understanding that this was a special moment. Laughter and cheers rose from the crowd, many people lifting their phones to capture the image. Adrian stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on Max's back, feeling the quiet tremor running through himself. Not from the spotlight of the ceremony, but from the flood of memories and the long road that had brought them here. After the award, a group of elementary school children sang, "You'll Never Walk Alone," their pure voices carrying across the square. Max sat upright, amber eyes catching the midday light as if listening to every word. Adrian thought to himself, if anyone embodied those lyrics more than anyone else, it was this four-legged partner. The ceremony ended with a release of blue and white balloons into the sky. All eyes followed the hundreds of floating spheres, each carrying a small note, messages of hope for the rescued victims and gratitude for the heroes who had made it possible. Adrian looked up, feeling Max's steady breath beside him, his heartbeat as sure and steady as the pulse of the town itself. As the crowd dispersed into the streets leading home, Glenford Square slowly grew quiet. The winter sun sank toward the far hills, washing the rooftops and sky in soft shades of orange and violet. Sunset spilled through the windows, laying a warm velvet glow across the stone pavement, where footprints and traces of the ceremony still lingered. Adrian bent down to fasten Max's leash. His hand brushed over the golden amber fur, feeling the warmth and solidity beneath. Max lifted his head, amber eyes catching the last light of day. An expression both gentle and deep, holding something beyond words, a quiet, unshakable trust. "We've done much, but there's still more ahead," Adrian murmured, his voice like a whispered promise. Max wagged his tail slowly. No sound but the look in his eyes told Adrian everything that promise was theirs together. It was a bond woven from nights of tracking and cold rain chases through the forest, and those moments when they stood shoulder to shoulder before a door about to open into the light. The breeze from the Glen River carried the scent of wood smoke from the town's hearths, mingling with the damp grass from the roadside. Their footsteps, one man, one dog. beat a steady rhythm on the stone, blending with the wings of evening birds cutting across the red-streaked sky. When they turned the corner, the warm glow of Sam's Cafe spilled through frosted glass. A few patrons waved in greeting. Adrian nodded back, keeping his pace slow so Max could pause at familiar corners, breathe in the scents, and then move on. They headed toward the edge of town, where a path led to Adrian's small home. The sunset stretched their shadows long, man and dog side by side, inseparable. In the quietest stretch of road, Adrian gave the leash a gentle squeeze, and Max looked up again. In those eyes, Adrian saw the answer clear. We will keep protecting this place. Just as they neared the driveway, the familiar crackle of the radio on Adrian's belt came alive. The dispatcher's voice was urgent but steady. Patrol Unit 4. We've received a report of an emergency in the north sector. Please respond. Adrian paused, looking down at Max. The shepherd's ears pricked forward and eyes brightening, body leaning into readiness. Adrian smiled, a smile of both resolve and trust. Looks like our promise starts today. The last light of sunset still clung to the sky as they turned back toward the patrol car. The engine roared to life, merging with the hum of activity returning in some corner of the town. The story of Adrian and Max was never just about the cases closed. It was about a human bond built on loyalty, courage, and trust. Max, the German shepherd with amber eyes, was more than a member of the rescue team. He was a living emblem of silent bravery, always ready to stand at the front lines to protect the vulnerable. Through every step, misty mornings on Glenford's narrow streets, tense pursuits through the forest, the sight of Adrian and Max walking together proved the power of connection between humans and animals. It was a language beyond words, grounded in respect and affection, where a glance or the lightest touch was enough to understand. This story reminds us that four-legged companions deserve not only love as pets, but recognition as partners, allies, and irreplaceable friends. Each German shepherd carries intelligence, loyalty, and instinct, qualities that can save not just a life, but the very trust of a community. Above all, Adrian and Max's journey inspires us to live with kindness, to reach out to those in need, to cherish moments of peace, and to remember that sometimes a sincere look can be enough to light an entire day.